My brother found out I retired from the United States Army while standing at a gas pump on a Sunday morning, holding a newspaper he had bought for the coupons. The call came in at 8:40. I was at my kitchen table with coffee and a tin box I had taken down from the closet shelf the night before, and I let the phone ring twice, which is one ring longer than I have let a phone ring in 26 years. When I answered, my brother's voice came through without any of its usual polish, and my brother's voice has had polish on it since the 10th grade. "You retired," he said. Not a question. "It's in the newspaper, Deb. Page B1. There's a photograph. I'm standing at a gas pump reading about my own sister." I looked at the tin box while he talked. Inside it were 3 rectangles of cardstock, heavy paper, the kind a print shop charges extra for, each one a little older than the last. I have carried that box through 4 duty stations. It weighs almost nothing. It is the heaviest thing I own. Grant kept going, and somewhere in the 3rd sentence his voice found its footing again, and the footing was not hurt. It was management. "Do you have any idea?" he said, and I stopped him there, gently, the way you stop a private who is about to say something he cannot take back. I said 4 words. "I'll call you back." And I hung up, and I sat in my quiet kitchen, and I did not call him back. Not that day. I know how this looks. A woman serves 26 years, retires in front of 400 people, and does not tell her own family the date. You are owed the reason, and the reason is not spite, and it is not a secret. The reason is a metal folding chair in a gymnasium in Georgia in 2006. So let me start there, where I started. My name is Deborah Lantry. Deb to everyone who matters and several people who don't. I enlisted in 1999 at 18 years old, a private with a bad haircut, a bus ticket, and a lower back that didn't ache yet. 26 years later, I retired this past June as a command sergeant major, carrying 2 metal pins in my left knee from a hard landing in Najaf. That is a title that means nothing to most civilians, so let me give it to you the way I gave it to a neighbor kid once. "Officers command the company," I told him. "I command the standard. 26 years, 6 duty stations, 2 deployments, and somewhere north of 2,000 soldiers who passed through my formations, each one of whom I could tell you something true about, because that was the job. Knowing your people. Standing where they could see you. If this story has a thesis, it is already on the table, so mark it. The entire profession of a sergeant major is showing up. That is the whole trade. I did it for a living for a 1/4 century, and it took me almost that long to notice nobody in my own family had ever done it for me. My brother Grant is 3 years older, and I want to introduce him fairly, because he is not a monster, and monsters are easier. Grant sells houses. Big ones, the kind with names instead of numbers, and he is genuinely good at it. And the reason he is good at it is the same reason this story happened. Grant understood, very young, that in America you do not have to be important if you can stand near important things while a camera goes off. His office wall is a museum of proximity. Grant with a retired quarterback. Grant with 2 mayors. Consecutive. Grant with a senator's elbow. Half a senator, really. Cropped tight to keep the eye moving. He hands his phone across restaurant tables the way other men hand out cigars. And my mother, Colleen, 74 now, learned her orbit early. Whichever child was louder needed her more, and Grant was born loud, and I never was. And that arithmetic ran our house for 50 years without anyone once writing it down. I can tell you the exact Christmas I stopped explaining my career at that table. 2005. I had just been selected for drill sergeant school, which for an enlisted soldier is a door opening, and I said so, once, quietly, over the ham. And Grant, who had closed on a lake property that week and needed the table back, smiled the smile he uses on open house Sundays and said, "That's great, Deb. It's the Army. They hand out medals for attendance." My mother laughed, not cruelly, automatically, the way you laugh at the person who has decided he is the funny one. My father did not laugh. I remember that. I remember exactly who laughed, because I was 27 years old, And that was the night I started keeping the one file a sergeant major should never keep about her own family. The attendance roster. Now the chair. The first chair. Drill Sergeant School graduation. Fort Jackson, Georgia, 2006. September. You have to understand what that course takes out of a person to understand what the ceremony puts back. 9 weeks of being evaluated on everything. Your voice, your knowledge, your bearing, the crease of you. And at the end they call your name in a gymnasium and put the campaign hat on you in front of whoever came. Each graduate got 3 guest seats. I mailed the paperwork home 6 weeks out. And then, because the print shop on base did them for $1 a piece, I had 3 cards made. Heavy stock. Black letters. Reserved, Lantry family. I taped them to 3 metal folding chairs in the second row myself, the morning of, at 6 in the morning, before anyone else was in the building. I want you to know I whistled while I did it. That is the detail that still gets me, all these years later. Not the empty chairs. The whistling beforehand. My mother called at 7:15. I took it in the hallway outside the gym in my pressed uniform with the hat I had bled for in a box under my arm. Honey, she said, and I knew from the first word, because honey is what she led with when the news was for Grant's benefit. Honey, Grant's brokerage is hosting a client gala tonight, and he really needs the family there. It's important for his career. His career. I stood in that hallway and did the math I had been raised to do. One sister's morning against one brother's evening. A gymnasium in Georgia against a ballroom in Ohio. And I heard myself say the sentence I would go on to say, in one form or another, for 20 more years. It's fine, Mom. It's just a ceremony. I said it to make her feel better. Write that down somewhere, because it is the confession this whole story rests on. Nobody taught my family that my ceremonies were optional. I taught them. One gracious sentence at a time. The gymnasium filled. Families in church clothes. Fathers with camcorders. Somebody's grandmother with a sign. And in the second row, 3 metal chairs with cardstock on them, empty in a way that has a sound if you are the one listening for it. Just before the processional, a woman in a yellow dress, somebody's mother from Alabama, overflowed from her own crowded row and sat in the first of my 3, and then saw the card, and went red, and started gathering her purse to move. And I stepped over from the formation, which you are not supposed to do, and I put my hand on the back of the chair, and I said one word. Day. She looked at me, and she understood the whole thing at once, the way strangers sometimes do when family can't, and she stayed, and when they called my name, that woman in the yellow dress stood up and hollered for me like I was hers. I never learned her name. 20 years later, I can still tell you the exact yellow. Here is what I did that night, alone in the barracks, and what it tells you about how these things calcify. I did not cry, and I did not call home and say what needed saying. I went back to the gym while the janitors were folding chairs, and I peeled my 3 cards off. Carefully, so they wouldn't tear, and I bought a tin box at the PX the next morning, mints originally, and I put the cards in it. If you had asked me why, I would have told you I keep records. That is even true. A sergeant major documents. But there are 2 reasons a person files something instead of throwing it away, and only one of them is administrative. And I was 28 years old and not yet honest enough to know which reason was mine. I should tell you about my father, because he is the exception that made the rule bearable, and because he does not make it to the end of this story. Raymond Lantry, a machinist. A quiet man with a left-handed slant to his writing that made every sentence look like it was leaning into wind. He did not do phones. He did letters. Every duty station I ever had. Every promotion. Every return from deployment. There would eventually be an envelope with that slanted writing. 4 or 5 lines. Never gushing. Always exact. Saw the storm hit your part of Texas. Trust the roof held. Proud is a small word for it. Dad. He never once made it to a ceremony either. And here is the difference I need you to understand. Because this story is not about attendance for its own sake. My father was a man with 2 settings, work and home, and travel frightened him in a way his generation did not discuss. But he never called my ceremonies just ceremonies. He knew the dates. He asked about them after. His absence had weight and apology in it, and my mother's had a gala in it, and a person can live on the first kind of absence for years. It is the second kind that files things in tin boxes. So that is the architecture, and I built my share of it. A brother who needed every room. A mother who orbited the noise. A father leaning into wind from a distance. And a soldier who learned to say it's fine so smoothly that her family reasonably concluded it was. For the next 8 years I said it at every rank I pinned on. And then came 2014, and a medal with my name engraved on the back of it, and the second chair. The second chair was 2014, Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and by then I had learned to order fewer cards. The Meritorious Service Medal is not a headline medal. It is a working soldier's medal, the kind you get for years, not moments. And the ceremony is small. A conference room with a flag and folding chairs and somebody's sheet cake from the commissary. I mailed home one date, printed 2 cards this time instead of 3, and taped them to the front row. And I want you to notice the arithmetic of hope shrinking. 3-2, because I had stopped budgeting for Grant. My mother called 9 days out, and the word was honey again, and behind the honey was an open house. Grant had a listing that weekend, a glass thing on a bluff, and there was a rumor the governor's people might walk through, and Moms was doing the flowers, because family shows up for family. She actually said that sentence to me about flowers, and did not hear it land. But my father said he was coming. Alone. A man who did not drive past the county line was going to drive 4 hours to Kentucky, and I knew what that decision cost him, because he told me the route twice on the phone. Every exit. Like a man rehearsing a mission. And on the morning of, 40 miles out, the alternator on his pickup gave, and he coasted onto the shoulder of Interstate 24, and that is where he was, standing in the wind next to a dead truck, when they read my citation. He called me after. I stepped out with the medal case still in my hand, and my father, who wasted words the way other men waste nothing, said I could see the exit sign, Deborah. Number 86. I was one exit of luck away. Then quiet. Wind in the phone, and then read me what the paper in the case says. And I stood in a parking lot and read my own citation to my father over a highway wind, and he listened all the way through, and said proud is a small word for it, and we hung up, and I put the second pair of cards in the tin that night. But I want the record to show the difference again, because it is the whole spine of me. One chair that year was empty because of an alternator. One was empty because of flowers. The tin does not sort them. I do. My father died in March of 2019, at the kitchen table, with the crossword half done. A Tuesday. I flew home and gave the eulogy because Grant, who speaks for a living, said he wouldn't get through it. And I stood up in front of that church and did what sergeants major do at funerals, which is hold the room steady so everyone else can fall apart on schedule. Afterward, going through his desk for the insurance papers, I found a shoebox with every letter I had ever written back to him, rubber banded by year, and tucked under the last band. In the leaning script, a list in pencil. My duty stations. My promotion dates. Every ceremony I had ever mentioned, with its date, going back to 2002. He had kept the schedule of a life he never once managed to attend. There are 2 kinds of absence. I told you that already. I am telling you again because I needed both hands to carry that shoebox to the car. The third chair was 2021, and it was not even a chair. That is what the third one taught me. By then it was the tail of the pandemic era, and my promotion to Command Sergeant Major, the summit of an enlisted life, was held in a half-capacity theater with a live stream link for families. No card stock. No taping anything at 6 in the morning. Just a link, which I sent to my mother and my brother 11 days out, with the time in 3 time zones because I do things properly. My mother replied with a heart. And during the ceremony, from my seat on the stage, I could see the operator's laptop at the side table, angled just enough, with the stream dashboard open, and the viewer counter sat at 17, and I spent the national anthem doing the worst math of my career, subtracting the battalion spouses I knew were watching, and I had the answer before the first speech ended. That night my mother texted, "Great opening remarks, honey." So proud. The opening remarks ended 8 minutes in. My portion, the pinning, my walk to the podium, my 30 years compressed into 4 minutes, began at minute 32. She had watched the beginning the way you hold a place in a book you do not intend to finish. I typed 3 replies and sent the 4th, which said, "Thanks, Mom," and I put my phone in a drawer, and there were no cards to put in the tin out front that year, so I wrote the date on a torn piece of program and filed that instead. And if you think a torn scrap weighs less than cardstock, you have never kept a tin like mine. Now I have to give you Maldonado, because this story starves without him, and because he is the reason the ending happens the way it happens. 2019. A few months after my father's funeral, the battalion handed me a private first class named Maldonado. 22 years old, 2 Article 15s deep, 1 more mistake from being processed out. Everybody had him filed under lost. I looked at his record and saw a kid who had never once been anybody's project, so I made him mine, the unglamorous way. Tuesday, 1600. My office. No agenda some weeks. Just showing up. Which, if you have been paying attention, is the only trick I know. Finance problems one Tuesday. His mother's immigration paperwork another. Land navigation. Twice because he was proud and hopeless with a map. He steadied. He made specialist, then sergeant, then the promotion list ahead of peers. And at his board he answered a question about leadership by saying, "Leadership is 11 Tuesdays in a row." And when the sergeant major on the panel asked what that meant, he said, "Ask my sergeant major." She counted. Except I hadn't. He had. He counted. That is the detail I carry. The kid everybody wrote off was the only person in my life keeping attendance on me. He collects hotel pens, by the way. Cheap ones. From every duty travel. A jar of them on his desk. And when I asked him why once, he said, "Evidence I was there. Sergeant Major." I did not tell him about the tin. Same church. Different pew. So, June of this year. 26 years in. My number came up the way numbers do, and I put in my retirement paperwork, and the battalion began planning the ceremony, which for a command sergeant major is not a conference room affair. It is a hangar. It is the colors and the formation and the flag folded 13 times by white gloves and handed over while somebody reads the retirement orders aloud. And it is, I will just say it, the single most attended to moment of an enlisted life. The adjutant sat across from me with his checklist, and he got to the line he gets to with everyone, and he asked, "Family seating. Sergeant Major, how many should we reserve?" And I want to tell you exactly what happened in me, because it was not anger, and it was not a plan, and I had not rehearsed it. What happened was the tin. 3 cards and a torn scrap crossed my mind in order, like a fire team crossing a road, and I heard myself say, "None." He looked up. I said it again, kindly so he would write it down. No reserved seats. He wrote it down. And that night I sat with the decision to see if it was spite wearing a clean uniform, because I have seen that disguise on other people, and I owed it a hard look on me. Here is where I landed, and you can judge it. I was not hiding my retirement. It was on the battalion calendar, in the base paper's listings, public as weather. I had simply, finally, stopped doing the one specific thing I had done for 20 years, which was print the tickets, tape the cards, send the link in 3 time zones, and hold the door of my life open with my foot while people decided whether Grant needed them more. If they asked, I would tell them. Nobody asked. In 26 years, I promised this on my father's pencil list. No one in my family ever once asked me for a date. They received dates. There is a difference, and the difference is this entire story. The morning of the ceremony was clear and hot. The hangar doors stood open to the airfield, and the light came in the way it does off concrete, doubled. Maldonado, Sergeant First Class promotable now, had volunteered to set the formation, and he set it the way I taught him. Dressed and covered, guidon snapping, 400 soldiers and change, plus wives and husbands and lawn chairs and somebody's baby who cried through the invocation like a tiny bagpipe, which I consider good luck. The colonel spoke. The orders were read. And near the end, while the photographers moved. The commanding general, making the kind of warm small talk generals make, leaned toward me at the edge of the dais and asked the question the adjutant's paperwork had left blank. "Sergeant Major, do we have your family seated somewhere?" And I looked out at that hangar, at the formation Maldonado had squared away, at the front row of soldiers I had counseled and promoted and occasionally saved from themselves. And the answer came out with no edge on it at all, because it had no edge in it. "No reserved seats, sir. My family is present." And I lifted my hand, palm open, toward the formation. I did not know the base's community paper had sent anyone. Edith Kwan has covered that installation for 30 years, a small woman with a large camera and the patience of a sniper. And she was standing off my left shoulder when I said it, and her shudder went once. Afterward, at the cake table, she introduced herself and asked me one question, notebook closed, which is how the good ones do it. She said, "I've shot 30 years of these, ma'am. The story is never at the podium. It's always in the chairs." Then she opened the notebook. "So tell me about yours." The story ran on a Sunday. Page B1, above the fold, under a headline I had no hand in and would not change. No reserved seats. A retiring sergeant major and the family she chose. I bought 2 copies at the gas station myself, Saturday night, because the base paper shares its Sunday edition with the counties, and the clerk who sold them to me had no idea, which I enjoyed more than I will admit. Edith had written 11 paragraphs, clean as a rifle inspection. The 26 years. The 2 deployments. A quote from the colonel. A quote from a private I had once marched to the dental clinic by the collar of his soul. And in the middle of it, set off in bold the way papers do when they know exactly what they are holding. The exchange from the dais. Word for word. Asked whether family was seated among the guests. Lantry gestured to the formation of 400 soldiers and said, "No reserved seats, sir. My family is present." Beside the text was Edith's photograph, the one her shudder took in the second I said it, my hand open toward the ranks, the light off the concrete doubling everything. And I am telling you plainly, I have official portraits from 6 duty stations and none of them look like me. That one looks like me. I read it at my kitchen table Sunday morning with the tin box within arm's reach. And here is the full inventory of what I did, because you deserve the honest version and not the noble one. I read it twice. I traced the quote with my thumb once, like checking a name on a wall. Then I folded the paper, laid it flat next to the tin, and finished my coffee while it was hot. And if some part of me sat a little straighter in that chair, alone, unwitnessed, then let the record show a sergeant major is entitled to 1 good posture per career. The phone rang at 8:40. "You were there for this part." Gas pump coupons. My brother's voice arriving before his polish did. "You retired." "It's in the newspaper, Deb." "I'm standing at a gas pump reading about my own sister." And now you know what I knew while I looked at that tin. Which is everything. All 3 cards and a torn scrap of it. So listen with me to what my brother said next. Because I did. Very carefully. The way you listen to a radio call that is about to tell you what kind of day this is. He did not ask how the ceremony was. He did not ask why he hadn't known. Not at first. Not really. What he said, voice climbing into its sales register, was, "There's a photograph, Deb. People read this. Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" And there it was. The entire operating system, delivered in 1 clause at a gas pump. Not, "We missed it." Not even, "How could you?" How this makes us look. 20 years of empty chairs had never once made the papers, and 1 photograph of an open hand had, and my brother had gone straight past the wound to the optics. Because to Grant, the wound was the optics. I told him, evenly, that the paper had printed what I said, and that I had said what was true. And then I gave him the sentence I had been keeping in the tin with everything else. Nobody was hidden from Grant. The date was public for 6 weeks. You'd have found it if I'd been a house. Then I said I had to go, and I went. And for the first time in living memory, my brother did not get the last word in a conversation, because there was no room left in it that he could sell. My mother called at noon, and this one I will not perform for you, because she is 74 and she cried. And her crying has never once in my life been a tactic. whatever else in her is. She said she felt sick. She said she had read it twice and couldn't finish her toast. And then she said the sentence I had known was coming since Saturday night, the one that half the comments under the online version were already saying in their own way. You should have told us, Deborah. We would have come. And I looked out my kitchen window at nothing, at the yard, and I did not raise my voice, because there was nothing in me that wanted to. Mom, I said, I told you for 20 years. I told you with cardstock and phone calls and a link in 3 time zones. I just finally stopped using invitations to do it. Silence on the line, long enough that I could hear her kitchen radio behind her, the gospel station, turned low. When she spoke again, her voice had gotten small, and what she said was not a defense, which I noted, and have kept. She said, the picture. Your hand out like that. Who took it? I told her the photographer's name was Edith Kwan. She repeated it, twice, the way you repeat something you intend to write down, and we said our goodbyes gently. 2 women handling a package neither of us was ready to open, and I did not understand until weeks later what she wanted the name for. Hold that. It is the closest thing to a flower this story grows. Here is the part nobody designed, least of all me. I had braced all week for the town to look at me differently. The diner, the church my mother goes to, the hardware store where they know my name. And the town did not look at me differently at all, because as far as this county was concerned, a soldier retiring with honors was a nice story about a nice woman, above the fold, next to the coupon insert. What changed? Quietly, in a way I only heard about secondhand and never once encouraged, was how the town looked at Grant. Because Grant had spent 15 years selling this county the story of family. His face on the bench ads, his slogan under it, the name you trust. The family that serves this community, his Christmas card with all of us staged on a porch. And the county had now read, over Sunday coffee, in Edith Kwan's flat clean prose, that the sergeant major with his last name had gestured at 400 soldiers when asked where her family was seated. Nobody wrote an angry letter. This is not that kind of county. It was smaller than that, and worse. The teller at his own bank, a Gold Star aunt, asked him, pleasantly, over the deposit slips, so why weren't you all at the hangar? A client at an open house said, beautiful kitchen. And then my husband's battalion was at that ceremony, you know. Grant told people there had been a misunderstanding about dates. Grant is good, and the line was smooth. And it worked the way a smooth line works on people who have already read the paper. Which is to say, they nodded, and filed it, and looked at the bench ads a half-second longer at red lights. A man who lives by the room's attention should be careful teaching the room to read. It took my brother 9 days to find a way to stand next to the photograph. The post went up on a Tuesday. Grant's business page, 1,100 followers, a cropped version of Edith's picture, my open hand toward the formation, him nowhere in it, which for Grant must have felt like a problem to be solved. The caption solved it. So proud of my baby sister, 26 years of service. Our family has always believed in showing up for this community. Humbled and grateful. I read it standing in my kitchen and I laughed. Once, one note. And I want to be precise about the laugh, because it was not bitter. It was the laugh you laugh at a magician you have watched your whole life, when he does the same trick at a funeral. Showing up. He had typed the words showing up, under that photograph. With those thumbs. I did not comment. I did not call. A post is weather. I decided it was weather, and I was mostly right. And then 11 days later the flyer proved me wrong. The flyer was for the grand opening of Lantry Premier Properties, his own brokerage at last, the franchise he had been chasing for 2 years. And the franchise math was not a secret in our family. 12 signed listings in 60 days or the license window closed. The mailer went to every household within rifle distance of that base. Heavy stock. Which I noted, because I know what heavy stock costs. On the left, Grant, arms crossed. The trustworthy jaw. On the right, lifted from the newspaper's website, me. In uniform. At my own retirement. Under a banner headline in small caps. 26 years of service behind every sale. And beneath it, in italic, like a testimonial, like I had said it to a camera for him. The quote, "My family is present." I sat down at the kitchen table with that mailer, and I did not trace anything with my thumb. I will tell you exactly what I felt, and it was not rage. It was recognition. The specific clinical recognition of watching a pattern complete itself. My whole life, Grant had stood next to things. Quarterbacks. Mayors, half a senator. And now, with the chairs empty behind him for 20 years, he had found a way to stand next to my career, in print, at scale, with a postage permit. The service he could not be bothered to attend had become the service behind every sale. There is a name for that in his industry. It is called staging. What I did took 4 days and 1 page. I called the Veterans Legal Clinic in town, the same storefront that helps soldiers with landlords. And a volunteer attorney named Ruth walked me through the plain civilian truth of it, which is that my name, my image, and my quote are mine, and using them to imply I endorse a business, without asking, is not a family misunderstanding. It is a commercial one, and commercial misunderstandings respond to letters. She drafted it in an afternoon. 1 page. No adjectives. It requested that Lantry Premier Properties cease using my name, image, likeness, rank, and any statement attributed to me in marketing materials. And it gave a date. And it was, Ruth said approvingly, boring as a tax form, which is exactly the temperature a letter like that should be. I signed it at Maldo's desk on post, because I was there for his promotion paperwork anyway. The office was dead quiet except for the low, rhythmic hum of the old fluorescent lights overhead. I did not have a pen on me, and he handed me one from the jar without looking up, a cheap ballpoint that said Comfort Sweets, Killeen, Texas on the barrel. And so it is entered into the record of this family that the boundary of my life was signed with evidence somebody else was there. I gave him the pen back. He said, "Keep it. It is in the tin." I never posted about the flyer. I need you to hear that, because what happened next happened entirely without me, and it is the part Grant will never understand. There is a Facebook group in every military town. The spouses page, part yard sale, part intelligence agency, 11,000 members around that base. And somebody's wife had gotten the mailer, and somebody's wife had read the Sunday paper, and somebody's wife did the simplest thing in the world. She photographed them side by side, the flyer next to the headline, "No reserved seats," and posted the 2 images with no caption at all. No caption. That is the genius of it. 400 comments would have been an argument. Silence was a verdict. The post traveled the way water travels, downhill into every crack. And Grant's grand opening seated 40 people in a room set for 120. And of the 12 listings the franchise required, he signed 3. Nobody boycotted him. This county does not boycott. They simply, quietly took their houses to the agency across the street, the one with no slogan at all. Because a man who lives by borrowed light goes dark the moment people learn where the light was borrowed from. He ran out of audience. It is the only currency he ever banked in, and I did not spend 1 cent of it. His own mailer did. Now the part where I stop being the wronged sister for a minute, because I have been circling this confession since the gymnasium in Georgia, and it is time to land it. For 20 years, I said it's fine. I graded my family's absences gently, printed new tickets every time, held the door with my foot, and called the whole arrangement grace. It was not grace. It was curriculum. I taught a 20-year course in which the syllabus said Deborah's ceremonies are optional, and my family passed it with honors. And here is the sentence I finally cannot argue my way around. You cannot teach a class that long and then fail the students alone. Grant wrote the flyer. That is his, entirely, and the letter stands, and the empty banquet room is his tuition. But the empty chairs, the original ones, the metal ones, I helped build those, 1 gracious sentence at a time. And a sergeant major who spent her career teaching soldiers to hold each other accountable spent 50 years grading her own family on a curve. The tin box was never really an archive. It was a report card I kept refusing to send home. I have 2 rulings on my brother, and they alternate like guard shifts. The generous one says Grant is a man who was handed all the light in our house before he could walk, and that nobody ever taught him light could be shared, only reflected. The other ruling is shorter and comes on at night. The flyer took planning. A cropped photo takes 10 seconds. A print run takes 10 days. Somewhere in those 10 days was a morning where he held a proof sheet with my uniform on it and approved it. Tired brothers do not do that. Salesmen do. And my mother. My mother I have stopped ruling on at all, because the evidence went and complicated itself. And I will show you what I mean, because it is hanging on a wall, and it is the last thing I have to show you before the chair. The fourth one, the one with my name on it. My mother arranged a dinner in September, at her house, pot roast, because in our family pot roast is both the meal and the white flag. Grant came. I came. Nobody performed a reconciliation, which I counted as progress, and the conversation stayed in the shallow end for most of an hour. Cousins, weather, the new stoplight by the feed store. Near the end, my mother reached across the table and took my hand, and I let her hold it. One full breath, maybe two, and then I drew it back. Gently, the way you take your hand off a wall you are still deciding whether to lean on. Some gestures need to sit in escrow a while before anybody should cash them. She nodded like she understood, and maybe she did, because of the three of us at that table. My mother is the only one who had already done something about any of it, and she had done it without a single word to me. I found it on the way back from the bathroom, in the hallway, where our family has always hung its official story. The wedding portrait. Grant's graduation. The staged porch Christmas from the bench ads. And now, between the wedding and the porch, in a frame she had clearly bought new because the brass was still bright, Edith Kwan's photograph. My open hand. The formation. The doubled light off the concrete. She had called the paper, asked for Edith by name, and bought a print with her own money, and hung it in the hallway, where every guest to that house will pass it for the rest of her life. She never mentioned it at dinner. She has never mentioned it since. I stood in that hallway a long moment, alone, and I want to be honest with you the way I have tried to be all the way through. It does not undo a gymnasium in Georgia. A framed photograph is not a filled chair, and my mother and I both know which one was asked for. But a woman who watched the beginning of my ceremony and quit at minute 8 went and framed the exact second of it that mattered, and hung it at eye level. And there are apologies made of words and apologies made of hardware, and I have decided, at 48, to accept the hardware. Half repairs are still repairs. You just have to stop billing for the other half. Grant walked me to my truck that night, hands in his pockets, no phone anywhere visible, which for Grant is practically undress. He did not apologize. I want that stated plainly, because you have earned the true ending and not the tidy one. What he said, looking at the driveway instead of me, was the letters handled. We pulled everything. Then a silence. And then the closest thing to the truth I have ever heard my brother produce. I ran out of ways to tell it, Deb. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. I ran out of ways to tell it, the confession of a salesman, that the inventory failed. Not the seller. And I stood by my truck and understood that this was the whole apology I was going to get. Possibly ever. And that it was, in its own dialect, enormous. His lease downtown ended in the winter. He works under another broker's sign now. No slogan. His face on nothing. I take no pleasure in it, and I will not pretend it grieves me either. The audience went home. That is all. For a man who only ever existed out loud, the quiet is the sentence. And no judge in this county could have written a longer one. The fourth chair was in October. Sergeant First Class Maldonado's promotion. A modest ceremony. A unit classroom with the flags in the corner and rows of gray chairs. And I drove down 2 hours because he had asked me in a text that said, in its entirety, "Will you come?" 4 words. First person in that family tree of mine, blood or otherwise, to ever send me the question instead of the schedule. I came early, the way I come everywhere, and a specialist at the door checked my name and walked me to the front. And there it was. Front row. Aisle seat. A piece of cardstock taped to gray metal. Block letters. And I would know the print shop's font anywhere because I paid $1 a piece for it 3 times. Reserved. Command Sergeant Major. Retired, Lantry. He had found out. Somehow about the tin. Or he hadn't. And some things just travel in the blood of a profession. I sat down in my chair, the first one anybody ever taped my name to. And when Maldonado marched forward and they read his orders, I stood up and hollered for him like the woman in the yellow dress. Exactly like her. And afterward he grinned and said, "Stay for cake, Sergeant Major." And I stayed. Of course I stayed. Attendance, it turns out, is the one thing they really do give medals for. My brother said so at Christmas 20 years ago. He just never understood he was describing the only medal our family ever failed to earn. The card came home with me, and the tin has 4 rectangles in it now and 1 hotel pen, and it sits on my bookshelf. Closed because the file is closed. That evening I wrote Maldonado a letter, on paper 4 lines. No gushing. And I tilted my pen without planning to, and the writing came out leaning, just slightly, into wind. Saw you pin it on. The formation looked sharp. Proud is a small word for it. Deb, thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. It took me 26 years of formations to learn that showing up is the one ceremony that never ends, and that you cannot make people attend your life. You can only stop selling tickets to the ones who never came, and save your front row for the people who ask you for the date. So let me ask you what the tin box asked me. Whose empty chair are you still keeping the card from? And who in your life keeps asking you for the date? Quietly, while you spend your invitations on someone who never comes. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, early with coffee, while it's still hot. If this story held you, the like button tells me so, and subscribing means the next one finds you. New stories premiere every week. Take care of yourself, and sit down in the chairs people save for you. I will see you in the next one.